Number 1. Ruja Ignatova. Ruja Ignatova was once hailed as the woman who changed the future of money. Elegant, educated, and widely persuasive, she strutted across stages in glamorous gowns, convincing thousands that her cryptocurrency, OneCoin, was the next Bitcoin. But like others in the crypto space, Ruja didn't just vanish from headlines, she vanished from the face of the earth. And she did it just before she was supposed to face federal charges. Since then, she's become one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. And her courtroom never happened, because the crypto queen never showed up. Ruja Ignatova was born in Bulgaria in 1980, but raised in Germany. She held a PhD in law from the University of Constance and previously worked at McKinsey & Company. She wasn't just intelligent, she was polished, confident, and magnetic. In 2014, she launched a cryptocurrency called OneCoin. She promised it would surpass Bitcoin, revolutionize finance, and create wealth for millions. She held flashy events around the world, packed stadiums, luxury parties, all with her at the center, dressed like a superstar and hailed as a visionary. But behind the glitter, there was no real blockchain. OneCoin had no actual value and no real transparency. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. Investors would buy packages, sometimes costing thousands of dollars, believing they were purchasing crypto coins. But the coins were worthless. Everything was controlled internally by the company, with no verification or exchange. Early investors were paid with the money of the newer ones, and those who asked too many questions were either silenced or ignored. Between 2014 and 2017, it's estimated that OneCoin scammed over $4 billion from people in over 175 countries. Many victims were ordinary people, trusting Ruja's word and desperate for a way out of poverty. Some families sold their homes or emptied savings, and in the end, they were left with nothing but broken promises. As law enforcement started circling in 2017, something strange happened. On October 25th, Ruja Ignatova boarded a Ryanair flight from Sofia, Bulgaria to Athens, Greece. And then, she vanished. Just like that. She missed a critical meeting in Lisbon, and her brother later admitted she went into hiding with the help of criminals. According to him, she had been tipped off about the FBI investigation. A few months later, her brother, Konstantin Ignatov, was arrested in the United States. He pled guilty to multiple charges and agreed to cooperate with authorities. Thanks to his testimony, investigators confirmed that Ruja had planned her disappearance carefully, even traveling with armed guards and using multiple passports. Because Ruja vanished before she could be arrested, she was never put on trial. But in March 2019, a U.S. court unsealed an indictment against her. She was charged with wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering, amongst other serious offenses. Authorities believe she used fake companies and offshore accounts to move the stolen money around the world. In 2022, she was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list, and a $100,000 reward was announced. That amount has since increased to $5 million, reflecting how desperate authorities are to bring her to justice. The problem is, no one knows where she is. Since she's still on the run, Ruja has not been sentenced. But if she was ever caught and convicted, experts believe she could face decades in prison, potentially up to 85 years, depending on the charges. Her brother, meanwhile, is still awaiting sentencing after cooperating with the investigation. OneCoin itself collapsed shortly after her disappearance. Offices were raided, websites shut down, and many executives were arrested. Number 2. Brenda Delgado. Brenda Delgado wasn't a cold-blooded killer in the traditional sense. She was a dental hygiene student living in Dallas, Texas, trying to move forward after a breakup. But behind her quiet appearance was something much darker, an obsession that spiraled completely out of control. In 2015, Brenda didn't pull the trigger herself, but she was the one who set everything in motion. The target? Her ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend. And when the plan turned deadly, Brenda didn't just disappear. She ran all the way to another country to avoid the consequences. Brenda Delgado had dated Dr. Ricardo Ricky Paniagua, a successful dermatologist. The relationship ended, but Brenda struggled to let go. Soon after, Ricky started seeing someone new, Dr. Kendra Hatcher, a 35-year-old pediatric dentist who had everything going for her. She was successful, well-loved, and by all accounts, deeply in love with Ricky. But to Brenda, Kendra wasn't just a new girlfriend. She was a threat. Brenda reportedly monitored their relationship online and even knew when Kendra was meeting Ricky's family. The more serious things got, the more obsessed Brenda became. By the summer of 2015, Brenda decided to act. She offered money, a car, and even the promises of connections to a hitman to two acquaintances, Christopher Love and Crystal Cortez. Brenda allegedly told them exactly where Kendra lived, what time she would be home, and how the plan should go. Cortez was the getaway driver. Love was the one who pulled the trigger. On September 2nd, 2015, Kendra Hatter was ambushed in the parking garage of her upscale Dallas apartment building. She had just parked her car when Christopher Love walked up and fatally shot her. It was a targeted killing, carried out with precision and all orchestrated by someone who wasn't even there. At first, police had no idea who was behind the murder, but surveillance footage of the getaway car quickly led them to Crystal Cortez. Under questioning, she confessed and gave up everything. She told detectives about Brenda Delgado and the plot to kill Kendra. By then, it was too late. Brenda had already fled the country. She crossed the border into Mexico and went to hiding. For months, she evaded capture. In April 2016, she was officially added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list. A $100,000 reward was offered, immediate coverage intensified. Authorities eventually tracked her down in the city of Torreon in northern Mexico. But even then, there was a problem. Mexico has strict rules about extraditing people to the countries that they use the death penalty. So, in order to bring Brenda back to the US, prosecutors agreed not to seek capital punishment in her case. The deal allowed the extradition to move forward, and Brenda was finally returned to Texas. Brenda Delgado was charged with capital murder for her role in planning Kendra's death. Although she didn't physically carry out the killing, prosecutors argued she was the mastermind, motivated by jealousy and a need for control. Her defense did not deny her involvement, but claimed she never truly believed the plan would result in murder. The trial drew national attention, in part because of the dramatic twists: a woman using others to carry out a murder, then fleeing to another country. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, planning documents, and witness testimony all pointed to Brenda as the one who gave the orders. In June 2019, Brenda Delgado was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christopher Love, the man who fired the gun, was sentenced to death in a separate trial. Crystal Cortez, who drove the getaway car, agreed to a plea deal and received a 35-year sentence in exchange for her cooperation. Number 3. Shenikica S. Miner. Shenikica Miner was once just an ordinary young woman living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But in March 2016, she became the center of a nationwide manhunt after committing one of the most disturbing crimes in recent memory. She was accused of killing her pregnant neighbor over something as petty as noise complaint, and then went on the run. The case not only left 2 innocent lives gone, but also made Miner one of the few women ever placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. On March 5, 2016, 24-year-old Shenikica Miner got into an argument with her neighbor, 23-year-old Tamika Perry. The conflict reportedly began because Miner's mother said Perry had been playing music too loudly late at night. Shenikica, angry over the situation, confronted Perry outside her duplex. Witnesses say she even fired a gun into the air before leaving, but that wasn't the end of it. Just a few hours later, early in the morning of March 6, Miner came back. She showed up at Perry's home, still armed and still furious. Her own mother tried to stop her, standing between the two women at the entrance of the duplex. But Shenikica reached over her mother's shoulder and fired her weapon. The bullet hit Tamika Perry in the chest. She was nearly full term in her pregnancy, just days away from giving birth. She managed to stumble back into her apartment but collapsed and died inside. Her unborn child didn't survive either. Inside the home, Perry's two young children witnessed the entire thing. In just seconds, their mother and their soon-to-be sibling were gone. After the shooting, Shenikica Miner fled. Authorities quickly issued a warrant for her arrest, but she managed to disappear. For nearly 4 months, law enforcement across the country searched for her. On June 28, 2016, she was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list. She became only the 10th woman ever to appear on that list. The FBI described her as armed and dangerous. They believed she had connections in several states and could be hiding with help. A reward of $100,000 was offered for information leading to her capture. Finally, on July 1st, 2016, a tip led at the FBI to a motel near the airport in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Inside, they found Shenikica Miner. She was arrested with no incident and taken into custody. Back in Milwaukee, Shenikica Miner was charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, one for Tamika Perry and another for the unborn child. She also faced a federal charge for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. She initially entered a not guilty plea, and her case moved forward in state court. Prosecutors laid out the full story of the night of the shooting and the days she spent on the run. Her defense team did not dispute that she fired the fatal shot, but argued over her intent and the state of mind at the time. In July 2017, Shenikica Miner accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of first-degree reckless homicide and 1 count of first-degree reckless homicide of an unborn child. On August 24, 2017, she was sentenced to 30 years in prison, followed by 10 years of extended supervision after her release. Number 4. Shante Henderson. Shante Henderson wasn't your typical fugitive. In 2007, she became one of the few women to ever appear on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Her face was sadly everywhere. On the news, on wanted poster, and all across the internet. At just 24 years old, Shante was accused of killing a man in cold blood on the streets of Kansas City. Her case wasn't just shocking because of her age. It was because of how fast and calculated everything unfolded. And when the FBI got involved, it was only a matter of time before her story came to an end. On September 2nd, 2006, 21-year-old Shante Henderson was driving near 29th and Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. She was affiliated with a gang known as the 12th Street Gang, and according to investigators, there was ongoing tension between rival groups. That day, Shante spotted someone she believed was connected to a rival gang, 36-year-old Andre Parker. Parker had reportedly been trying to stay away from gang violence and had no weapon on him, but Shante didn't hesitate. She pulled out a gun and opened fire in broad daylight. Parker was struck and killed almost instantly. The shooting took place in a public area right in front of witnesses, but even with multiple people around, Shante fled the scene before police arrived. From that moment on, she disappeared, evading law enforcement for a month while authorities struggled to track her down. As weeks passed with no signs of her, authorities became more and more frustrated. By early 2007, the FBI elevated the case and added Shante Henderson to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list, making her just the 3rd woman to ever receive that status at the time. A reward of $100,000 was offered for information leading to her capture. The strategy worked. Just a day after being placed on the list, Shante was spotted by someone who had seen her wanted poster. On March 1st, 2007, she was arrested without incident at a house in Kansas City. The arrest was quick and quiet, bringing an end to a nearly 6-month-long search. Shante was charged with second-degree murder and armed criminal action. She admitted to shooting Andre Parker but claimed it was done in self-defense. Her attorney agreed that she felt threatened and reacted in the heat of the moment. Prosecutors, however, pointed to her gang affiliations, the number of shots fired, and the fact that Parker was unarmed. They described the killing as a targeted act, an execution motivated by rivalry, not fear. The trial focused heavily on Shante's background, her gang ties, and her behavior in the days following the shooting. Despite her claims, the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. In October 2007, Shante Henderson was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. It was a lesser charge but still carried serious consequences. she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the killing of Andre Parker. After her conviction, Shante also faced federal charges related to illegal firearm possession. As a convicted felon with gang affiliation, those charges added extra time to her sentence. Altogether, she spent several years behind bar before eventually being released. Her time on the FBI's most wanted list may have been brief, but the damage from her actions lasted much longer. Number 5. Susan Edith Saxs. In the early 1970s, America was in a state of unrest. Vietnam War protests, civil rights movements, and rising political tension filled college campuses across the country. But Susan Edith Saxs took things further than most. She wasn't just protesting the system, she was willing to break it. A former honors student at Brandeis University, Saxs would go from activist to armed robber almost overnight, and her involvement in a deadly crime would land her on the FBI's most wanted list, where she stayed for over 5 years. On September 20th, 1970, Susan Saxs, then just 21 years old, teamed up with a small group of radical activists. Along with fellow Brandeis student Katherine Power and 3 former convicts, she planned a bank robbery in Brighton, Massachusetts. The goal wasn't personal profit, it was political. They wanted to use the stolen money to fund revolutionary causes, including efforts to help Black liberation groups. The plan was to rob State Street Bank and Trust Company. But before that, they broke into a National Guard armory to steal weapons and ammunition. Then, on the day of the robbery, the group stormed the bank, armed and ready. During the heist, tragedy struck. A responding police officer, Walter Schroeder, was shot in the back as he approached the scene. He later died from his injuries. Although Saxs wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, she was part of the organized plot that led to his death. The event shocked Boston and sent law enforcement into overdrive. After the robbery and shooting, Susan Saxs went on the run. She managed to disappear without a trace, even as the FBI launched one of its largest manhunts. Katherine Power also fled, and both women became symbols of a new kind of fugitive, educated, ideological, and determined to stay hidden. Saxs evaded capture for over 5 years, changing her name and blending into radical activist circles. She moved across states, worked under the radar, and avoided any form of detection. At a time where there were no digital trails, she managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities. Finally, on March 27, 1975, federal agents tracked her down in Philadelphia. She had been living under assumed identity and working quietly. Her arrest ended years of pursuit and brought a sense of closure to one of the most politically charged crimes of the decade. Back in Boston, Susan Saxs faced federal and state charges for her role in the robbery and the death of Officer Schroeder. Prosecutors argued that even though she didn't pull the trigger, her participation in the planning and execution of the crime made her equally responsible. Saxs pleaded guilty to charges including armed robbery and assault. In court documents and media interviews later in life, she admitted her role in the plot but emphasized that her motives were political, not personal. Susan Saxs was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. She served her time at various facilities, including the Federal Correctional Institute in Alderson, West Virginia. By the early 1980s, she had completed her sentence and was released. Since then, Saxs has lived a relatively quiet life. She has spoken about her past and reflected that extremism of her use. While she still holds progressive views, she has acknowledged the harm caused by her action, particularly the loss of Officer Schroeder. Number 6. Bernardine Dorne. In the late 1960s and early 70s, Bernardine Dorne was one of the most recognizable figures in the American radical left. Once a promising law student from the University of Chicago, she turned her back on conventional life and became a key leader of the Weather Underground, a militant group that believed violent resistance was the only way to force change in the US. Her story is not one of greed or revenge, but of political extremism that escalated to bombings, fugitives, and federal indictments. And for over a decade, Dorne evaded the law, hiding in plain sight. Bernardine Dorne helped lead the Weather Underground organization, a far-left radical group that emerged from anti-Vietnam War movement. What began with protests quickly turned into direct action. The group bombed government buildings, police stations, and corporate offices, hoping to send political message against what they saw as systematic oppression and imperialism. From 1970 to 1975, the Weather Underground claimed responsibility for over 20 bombings. These attacks targeted places like the US Capitol, the Pentagon, and various courthouses. The group stated that they took steps to avoid casualties by warning buildings beforehand, but the acts were still classified as domestic terrorism. Dorne wasn't just a participant. She was the spokesperson, strategist, and one of the most prominent faces of the group. She publicly praised some of their actions and was tied to bomb-making activities, though authorities couldn't link her to any single bombing that caused a loss of life. One of the most notorious moments tied to the group was the accidental explosion of a New York townhouse in 1970. Members were constructing bombs when the devices detonated prematurely, killing 3 Weather Underground members. Dorne was not present but went underground soon after, becoming a fugitive. After the townhouse explosion, Bernardine Dorne disappeared. For over a decade, she lived under assumed names and moved between safe houses. Despite being on the FBI's radar, she managed to avoid capture for 11 years, supported by sympathizers and a tight network of fellow radicals. During that time, she remained active in underground publications and radical circles, though always in secret. The FBI continued to track her movements, but with limited success. As years passed, many began to wonder if she'd ever resurface. Then, in 1980, with the political climate shifting and her priorities changing, Dorne voluntarily surrendered to authorities in Chicago. She had married a fellow Weather Underground member, Billy Aries, and together they had started a family. Her decision to come forward surprised many, but she made it clear she was ready to face the consequences. When Bernardine Dorne turned herself in, she was charged with multiple counts related to conspiracy, destruction of government property, and interstate travel to incite riots. However, due to government misconduct, including illegal surveillance and mishandled evidence, several of the most serious federal charges were dropped. Ultimately, Dorne faced charges for refusing to testify before a grand jury and a separate case involving a radical group called the Brinks Robbery Suspect. Prosecutors pushed her for cooperation, but she refused. Bernardine Dorne was sentenced to 7 months in federal jail for contempt of court, specifically for refusing to testify. It was a relatively light sentence compared to the years she'd spent underground and the serious crimes the Weather Underground was linked to. After her release, she transitioned into public life. She completed her law degree, became a legal scholar, and even taught at Northwest University School of Law. Though she remained unapologetic about her past activism, she shifted focus toward criminal justice, reform, and youth advocacy. Number 7. Donna Jin Wott. In the mid-1980s, Donna Jin Wott stood out, not only as a member of radical factions, but as one half of the first man and woman pair ever added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list together. She wasn't a bank robber or a violent gang member. Instead, she helped orchestrate a daring plot to blow up a federal prison in Kansas to free a political prisoner. It was idealistic, it was extremist, and for nearly a decade, she lived under a false identity while the FBI searched for her. In 1985, Donna Jin Wott teamed up with her partner, Claude Daniel Marks, and aligned with the radical Weather Underground and the Puerto Rican separatist group, FALN. Their plan? To purchase roughly 36 pounds of explosive from an undercover FBI informant, with the intent of breaking a radical political prisoner, Oscar Lopez Rivera, out of maximum security prison in Kansas. Though the prisoner's escape plan never materialized, law enforcement deemed the plot a serious domestic terrorist threat. The weapons purchase alone triggered nationwide interest and heightened surveillance. Once the pair realized they were under watch, they vanished. On May 22, 1987, Donna Jin Wott and Claude Marks were officially added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, becoming the first ever man-woman couple to appear simultaneously. For nearly 7 years, they lived under assumed names. Wott went by Joe Elliott in Pittsburgh's Squirrel Heights neighborhood, raised the children, volunteered at AIDS charities, and appeared to lead a peaceful life. Finally, on December 6, 1994, after extended negotiations and with pressure mounting, they turned themselves into authorities in Chicago. Back in court, The government brought charges related to conspiracy, explosive procurement, and intent to commit a terrorist act tied to the planned prison breakout. However, the case's complexity, plus public scrutiny of her handling of radicals, led to plea negotiations. During the proceedings, evidence presented included FBI recordings of Mark discussing explosive purchases and travel routes, as well as surveillance of their hiding places. Wilmot did not deny her involvement but maintained she hadn't carried out any bombing herself. Her role was ideological support, logistics, and facilitation. On May 9, 1995, Donna Jin Wott pled guilty to conspiracy and explosive charges in connection with the plot. In exchange, she received a relatively light sentence of 3 years in prison. Her partner, Claude Marks, got a longer sentence of 6 to 7 years due to his heavier involvement. Number 8. Katherine Ann Power. Katherine Ann Power was a bright honor student at Brandeis University in 1970. She believed the Vietnam War was unjust and joined a radical cell that wanted to take action. But a plan meant to fuel a political movement instead of sparked tragedy, sending her underground for over 2 decades. In September 1970, Power and a small group of radical activists broke into Massachusetts National Guard Armory in Newburyport. They stole weapons, ammunition, and blasting caps intended to fund anti-war actions and a bank robbery. Days later, they executed that robbery in Brighton, Boston. Katherine drove a switch car during the getaway. Inside, one of her accomplices opened fire, killing Boston police officer Walter Schroeder Sr. when responding to the heist. Although she wasn't at the scene when the officer was shot, Power's logistical role tied her directly to the deadly event. The plan had been ideological. The outcome was tragic. As police closed in, she fled with Susan Saxs and others, disappearing in America's counterculture underground. Katherine lived in hiding for 23 years, under the alias Alice Louise Metzinger. She settled in Oregon, becoming a chef, business partner in restaurants, and mother to a son named Jamie. She was removed from the FBI's most wanted list in 1984 due to lack of leads. By the early 1990s, afflicted by depression and guilt, she began negotiating with authorities. On September 15, 1993, at age 44, she surrendered in Boston, ending more than 2 decades as a fugitive. Katherine pleaded guilty to state charges of armed robbery and manslaughter, and separately admitted to federal charge tied to the armory theft. Authorities concluded she had helped plan and enable the crimes, even if she didn't pull the trigger herself. As part of her plea agreement, prosecutors recommended 5 years in prison for the armory theft to be served concurrently with her state sentence. On October 6, 1993, Power was sentenced in Massachusetts to 8 to 12 years for the bank robbery, with eligibility for parole after just over 5 years. She also received 5 years concurrent federal sentence for the armory theft, plus a $10,000 fine. A 20-year probation condition prohibited her from profiting from her story. Power served about 6 years, withdrawing her parole request in 1998 to avoid appearing insincere to victim's family. She was released on October 2, 1999, at age 50, then placed on 14 years of probation. During her sentence, she completed a bachelor's degree and later earned a master's degree in philosophy and ethics. She went on to teach, write, and remain active in community work in the Boston area.